Acknowledgement of country. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which we meet today. I would also like to pay my respects to elders past, present and future. I am Nomad. Look out for trivia questions in this video. Our presenters for this episode will be Nomad, Robbie and Elena. In this episode, we will begin to fasten the pace as we investigate our grandparents. Many of you will have 4 grandparents to investigate. However, if one of your parents' birth certificates does not show a father, you would most likely only be investigating 3 grandparents. If both parents' certificates show no father, you would be investigating just 2 grandparents, one on each side. As for my chart, I have all 4 of my grandparents and was very lucky to have met each one of them.
You can probably guess what the process is, but in case you need a reminder, it is very simple. It is exactly the same process as you have done for yourself and your parents.
Simple, isn't it? Well, it can be if you know all the necessary information about your grandparents. If you don't, there may be more digging required.
Before we continue, we need to address the elephant in the room. Our references are currently related to anyone born within Australia. For those born outside Australia, we will be covering that at a later stage. Remember, this series is about using Australian records.
Let's go over the full process in more detail. 1. Gather as much information and details as possible. 2. Speak to relatives. Make notes, even set up interviews for recording. 3. Visit local libraries, records offices, archives. More on this later. 4. Sort your documents files, etc. 5. Photographs will end up playing a huge role. Make sure you know who the people are in them. More on this later. 6. If you can, plan visits to where relatives lived, plus add visits to local cemeteries.
By now in your collection, you may have the following. 1. Your birth certificate. 2. Your mother's birth certificate. 3. Your father's birth certificate.
You may be wondering about marriage and even death certificates as we move forward. We will be discussing these in detail in our next episode.
But if you're keen to get ahead, you can start collecting these now so your documents and tree can grow. Remember to make sure you've proved all the details before adding them to your chart.
But for the moment, I suggest keep them aside and safe. Storage will become important.
Now, to your grandparents' birth certificates. For me, this is where my story becomes interesting. Lots of questions come up, but again, we are getting ahead of ourselves.
On your certificates, you will begin to see how your research begins to take a much bigger picture. We will start with, what are you looking at on the certificates? You should see the full names of your grandparents, their dates of birth, where they were born and sometimes the place of birth. Maybe it is a hospital.
As you examine these certificates, have you found any details that are a surprise? As you look further down the certificate, you may get other important information, like names of your great-grandparents when they were married, their ages when your grandparents were born. This is where my detective instincts begin to hit in.
You may see a list of siblings if your grandparents weren't the firstborn. Their ages may even be shown. I'm sure you know what to do to calculate the rough year of birth for each of them. If necessary,
Adding to your interest, questions, etc., you may come across the maiden name of your great-grandmother. More on this later. Your brain may be going into overload.
looking further down the document, you may see who was the informant and their address at the time of the birth. This may be the mother or even the father.
Toward the bottom of the document, you may see witnesses. Usually it's a medical person like a doctor, nurse or midwife. Other times, it may be someone else who has witnessed the birth.
Of course, there is the registration information and registration date. You may even come across notes and other details added after the registration of the birth.
Oh, and one other thing near the top of the certificate is the registration number of the document. Do you know where you use this? Clue, citing, and sourcing.
One last thing about the birth certificate document. You may see a place for marginal notes. Be aware that they may contain some vital information. Not all certificates have a note in this area.
I mentioned above where my story becomes interesting and, oh boy, the questions flowed. I go back to when I began this journey. At the time, I had no interest whatsoever in family history. Around 1977, I was planning to travel to the UK and needed to gather documentation. This is where and when I discovered my grandfather on my father's side was born in England. Suddenly I needed birth certificates, proof of relationships, the lot. This story goes on, so I won't bore you with all the details. You can check out my blog as my full story is there. I will provide a link for the blog post, How and Why I Started. Part 1. It was published on 31st January 2023.
In later episodes, we'll show you how you can write stories about your grandparents, your parents, and even yourself. Remember, these stories are very, very important.
Questions and even more questions. My dad's mother. No father is shown on the birth certificate. Oh, and she has a different birth name. My mother's father. The birthplaces of his parents are both shown as Scotland. My mother's mother. The birthplace of her father is England.
This brings us to the end of this episode. Our next subject matter will be marriage and death certificates. If you haven't already begun collecting these documents, please start looking at obtaining these.
In 2 weeks' time, we will also briefly discuss adding information electronically, on your computer and online. We will be coming back to all those questions mentioned in another episode. We haven't forgotten. See you in 2 weeks. Remember, it's not a race, and have fun. With all of us here, we would be delighted for you to join our family. I am sure you know the drill. Click like, subscribe, and of course, please make a comment.